The last bastion Admiral Kexara stood on the bridge of the dreadnought Stellar Guardian, watching through the viewports as her once mighty fleet burned in the darkness of space. The elegant crystal formations that housed her species' consciousness flickered with exhaustion and despair. Around Haven Prime, the last stronghold of the Galactic Defense Alliance, the wreckage of 1,000 ships drifted like metallic snow against the planet's defensive shields. The Zenthari Admiral's 4 arms moved across the command interfaces, with practiced precision, but even her species' legendary calm was cracking under the weight of inevitable defeat. For 3 years, the Devourer swarm had swept across the galaxy like a plague of living metal, consuming entire star systems and converting their resources into more of their terrifying biomechanical warriors. "Admiral," called Subcommander Veltar from the tactical station, his insectoid features twitching with barely controlled panic. Long-range sensors detect another Devourer wave approaching. Estimated strength, 40,000 vessels. Kexara's crystal formations dimmed. Her remaining fleet numbered barely 300 ships, most of them damaged beyond optimal fighting capacity. The mathematics were simple and brutal. They would be overwhelmed within hours. "How many civilian transports remain on Haven Prime?" she asked, her melodic voice carrying across the bridge despite her inner turmoil. 17 million souls, Admiral," replied Communications Officer Zara, her blue-scaled, Aquarian features etched with sorrow. "The evacuation ships were destroyed during the last attack. There's nowhere left to run." Kexara closed her primary optical sensors, feeling the weight of those 17 million lives pressing down on her consciousness. Haven Prime wasn't just the Alliance's last military stronghold. It was the final refuge for survivors from dozens of conquered worlds. Children, elders, artists, scientists, and dreamers who had fled the Devourer advance now huddled in underground shelters, waiting for a miracle that would never come. The Devourers were perfect war machines, evolved from some long-dead civilization's ultimate weapon. They felt no fear, showed no mercy, and learned from every encounter. Their biomechanical bodies could adapt to any environment, their weapons could pierce any shield, and their numbers seemed infinite. Worse still, they converted fallen enemies into more of their kind, growing stronger with each victory. "Admiral," Veltar announced, his voice hollow. "Incoming transmission from the Devourer fleet." This was new. The Devourers had never communicated during their 3-year rampage. They simply arrived, conquered, and consumed. Kexara gestured for the transmission to be displayed on the main screen. The image that appeared made several bridge officers recoil in horror. A Devourer Prime, one of their command units, filled the screen. Its body was a nightmarish fusion of organic tissue and mechanical components, with dozens of optical sensors and weapon ports integrated into its elongated skull. When it spoke, its voice was a chorus of harmonized mechanical and biological tones. "Zenthari, Admiral. Your resistance ends now. Surrender Haven Prime and your deaths will be swift. Continue fighting and we will convert your survivors into our servants before consuming your world." Kexara straightened to her full height, her crystal formations blazing with renewed light. "I am Admiral Kexara of the Galactic Defense Alliance. While I draw breath, Haven Prime stands." The Devourer Prime's optical sensors focused on her with predatory intensity. "Admirable. Futile. Your species' courage will make excellent raw material for our expansion." The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in stunned silence. Kexara turned to address her multi-species crew, representatives of the 37 civilizations that had once made up the mighty Galactic Alliance. "My friends," she began, her voice carrying the weight of leadership that had sustained them. "Through impossible odds, we face our final hour. Our fleets are broken, our worlds are gone, and our people depend on us for their last hope of survival." She paused, looking into the faces of beings from across the galaxy. Insectoid Kythera, crystalline luminari, aquatic hydros, gaseous nebulans, and dozens of other species who had put aside ancient differences to stand together against extinction. "The Devourers believe they have already won," Kexara continued. "They see us as defeated, broken, ready to submit. They are wrong. Today we show them that some things in this galaxy burn too bright to be extinguished. The crew responded with a chorus of affirmations in their various languages, but Kexara could see the despair in their eyes. They would fight because it was their duty, but none of them believed they could win. The impossible arrival. The first sign something had changed came from the long-range sensors. Communications Officer Zara's scaled features showed confusion as she monitored the readings. "Admiral, I'm detecting hyperspace signatures at the edge of the system. Small fleet, maybe 20 ships. Configuration, unknown." Kexara frowned. No Alliance reinforcements were expected. There were no Alliance fleets left to send. Could these be neutral traders, foolishly stumbling into a war zone? "Put them on screen," she ordered. The tactical display showed a formation of ships unlike anything in the Alliance database. They were smaller than capital ships but moved with aggressive purpose. Their hulls were angular, utilitarian, painted in patterns of blue and white with strange symbols. Most unusual of all, they were broadcasting on standard Alliance frequencies. Unidentified. "Alliance vessel. This is Captain Lisa Chen of the Terran Defense Force. We received your distress beacon. Sorry, we're late to the party." Kexara's forearms froze over her controls. "Terran? I'm not familiar with that species designation." The response came with what sounded like amusement. "We're new to the neighborhood, Admiral. Call us humans. We've been watching the Devourer situation develop, and frankly, we're not impressed with their attitude." Sub-Commander Veltar's antennae twitched frantically as he processed the tactical data. "Admiral, those ships are heading directly toward the Devourer Advance Force. 20 vessels against 40,000. This is madness." Kexara activated the communication channel. "Captain Chen, I am Admiral Kexara of the Galactic Defense Alliance. I appreciate your courage, but your fleet cannot possibly engage a Devourer force of that magnitude. You should retreat immediately." "Retreat?" Captain Chen's voice carried a tone Kexara had never heard before. Not fear or despair, but something that sounded almost like eager anticipation. "Admiral, with respect, humans don't retreat when innocent people are in danger. We've studied Devourer tactics for months. They're impressive, but they have weaknesses." "Weaknesses?" Kexara asked incredulously. "Captain, the Devourers have conquered half the galaxy. They adapt to every weapon, counter every strategy. What weakness could you possibly exploit?" "They think like a machine," Captain Chen replied. "Perfect coordination, optimal tactics, predictable responses. Admiral, has anyone ever tried fighting them with pure, chaotic, illogical human stubbornness?" Before Kexara could respond, human ships engaged the Devourer Advance Force. The human method. What followed defied every principle of space combat that Kexara had learned in her centuries of military service. The human ships didn't form battle lines or execute coordinated maneuvers. Instead, they scattered in seemingly random directions, each vessel operating independently with a creativity that bordered on insanity. One human ship, barely larger than a fighter, somehow penetrated the Devourer formation and detonated what appeared to be an improvised weapon that created a chain reaction through an entire squadron of enemy vessels. Another human ship used its tractor beam not to capture enemies, but to fling debris at incredible speeds, turning space junk into devastating projectiles. "This is impossible," breathed Veltar as he watched the tactical display. "Their formations make no sense. There's no coordination, no unified strategy. How are they achieving these results?" Captain Chen's voice came over the communication channel, slightly strained but still carrying that inexplicable confidence. "Admiral, we could use some help here. Your ships have better shields than ours. Think you could cover us while we set up our next surprise?" Kexara found herself giving orders before she consciously decided to act. "All ships, move to support the human fleet. Protect their flanks while they whatever it is they're doing." The Alliance fleet, reinvigorated by the humans' impossible success, surged forward. Kexara watched in amazement as her experienced crews began adapting to the humans' chaotic tactics. Instead of fighting as a unified force, individual ship, commanders started making independent decisions, improvising solutions. embracing the unpredictability that the humans had introduced to the battle. The effect on the Devourer forces was immediately apparent. Their perfect coordination began to break down as they encountered tactics that didn't fit their predictive models. Ships that had operated with machine-like precision started making errors, failing to anticipate human actions that were, by definition, unpredictable. "Look at this," Communications Officer Zara called out excitedly. "The Devourers are requesting data updates from their command units. They're confused." Kexara felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Hope. "Captain Chen, what are you people?" "We're humans, Admiral," Captain Chen replied as her ship executed an impossible maneuver that should have torn it apart, but somehow resulted in the destruction of 3 Devourer cruisers. "We specialize in winning fights we're supposed to lose." The battle raged for hours, but gradually the tide turned. The Devourer advance force, despite overwhelming numerical superiority, found itself pushed back by tactics it couldn't comprehend or counter. When the humans began using damaged Devourer ships as improvised weapons, ramming them into larger vessels or rigging them to explode at crucial moments, the enemy formation finally broke. For the first time in 3 years, a Devourer force retreated. Through aftermath, as the enemy ships fled to regroup, Captain Chen's vessel approached the Stellar Guardian. Kexara found herself genuinely curious about these humans who had just accomplished the impossible. "Permission to come aboard?" Captain Chen requested. "I think we need to talk strategy." An hour later, Kexara stood in her conference chamber facing the most unusual being she had ever encountered. Captain Lisa Chen was bipedal, shorter than most sentient species, with dark hair and eyes that seemed to constantly evaluate and calculate. Her uniform was practical rather than ceremonial, and she carried herself with a confidence that seemed entirely disproportionate to her species' apparent physical limitations. "You saved 17 million lives today," Kexara said formally. "The Alliance owes humanity a debt that can never be repaid." Captain Chen smiled, an expression that somehow conveyed both warmth and predatory satisfaction. "Admiral, we're just getting started." That was a scouting force. The real Devourer fleet is still out there, probably analyzing what just happened and adapting accordingly. "Then we're still doomed," Sub-Commander Veltar observed gloomily. "If they adapt to your tactics, they'll try," Captain Chen agreed. "But here's the thing about humans. We don't just have one set of tactics, we have thousands. Every human thinks differently, fights differently, solves problems differently. By the time they figure out how to counter what we did today, we'll be doing something completely different." Kexara studied the human captain carefully. "Your species enjoys conflict. We enjoy survival," Captain Chen corrected, "and we're very, very good at it. Admiral, how would you feel about a real alliance? Human creativity and adaptability combined with your species' strategic knowledge and resources?" "The Alliance Council will need to approve any formal agreements," Kexara replied cautiously. Captain Chen's smile widened. "That's fine. While they're debating, my people will be getting ready for the next battle. Fair warning, Admiral. When humans decide to help someone, we don't do anything halfway." As if to emphasize her point, Kexara's communications officer announced, "Admiral, we're detecting multiple hyperspace signatures throughout the system. Large fleet incoming." Kexara tensed, expecting another Devourer attack, but Captain Chen looked pleased. That'll be the rest of the Terran Defense Force. I called them while we were fighting. Hope you have enough docking space. We brought about 600 ships." Kexara stared at the human captain in amazement. 600 ships? How large is your fleet?" "Large enough," Captain Chen replied mysteriously. "Admiral, the Devourers have been having their way with this galaxy because everyone's been fighting them on their terms. Time to change the rules." As human ships began materializing throughout the Haven system, Kexara felt something she hadn't experienced since the war began: the possibility of victory. These humans were unlike any species she had ever encountered. Chaotic, yet effective. Small yet mighty, impossible yet undeniably real. The war was far from over, but for the first time in 3 years, the Galactic Defense Alliance had hope. and they had allies who specialized in turning impossible odds into inevitable victory. Outside the viewports, human ships took up defensive positions around Haven Prime with the same casual competence they had shown in battle. Whatever happened, next, Kexara realized, the galaxy would never be the same. The humans had arrived and they were just getting started. The War Council. The main conference chamber aboard the Stellar Guardian had been hastily reconfigured to accommodate representatives from both the Galactic Defense Alliance and the newly arrived Terran Defense Force. Admiral Kexara found herself studying the human delegation with growing fascination and concern. Captain Lisa Chen had brought 5 of her officers, each one representing a different aspect of human military capability. There was Commander Sarah Rodriguez, whose tactical displays showed battle scenarios that made seasoned Alliance veterans wince with their audacity. Lieutenant Marcus Webb appeared to be some sort of special operations specialist, his equipment and bearing suggesting capabilities that went far beyond conventional warfare. Most unsettling was Dr. James Park, who introduced himself as a xenopsychologist. Apparently a human science dedicated to understanding alien psychology for military purposes. The fact that such a discipline existed spoke volumes about human priorities. Admiral, Captain Chen began, activating a holographic display that showed the current strategic situation. Our intelligence suggests the Devourers are massing their primary fleet for a final assault on Haven Prime. Estimated strength 200,000 vessels. The Alliance representatives exchanged grim looks. Even with the human reinforcements, they were still outnumbered 30-1. Subcommander Veltar's antennae drooped with despair. Captain, even your remarkable tactics cannot overcome such overwhelming numbers. You're right, Captain Chen agreed cheerfully, if we fight them conventionally. But humans gave up on conventional warfare about the time we discovered that rules are meant to be broken. Lieutenant Webb spoke for the first time, his voice carrying the flat certainty of someone who had survived situations that should have been impossible. Admiral, has anyone ever tried psychological warfare against the Devourers? Kexara's crystal formations flickered with confusion. Psychological warfare? The Devourers are biomechanical constructs. They don't have psychology in any recognizable sense. Dr. Park leaned forward, his eyes bright with scientific enthusiasm. Actually, Admiral, they do. We've been studying their behavioral patterns for months. The Devourers operate as a hive, mind, but it's not a perfect unity. There are hierarchies, decision trees, stress responses. They can be confused, frustrated, even temporarily overwhelmed. Impossible, declared General Thexmore of the Cathara Swarm. We have fought them for 3 years. They show no emotion, no individual responses. Because no one's pushed the right buttons, Commander Rodriguez interjected. Admiral, may I show you something? The holographic display shifted to show a detailed analysis of Devourer fleet movements over the past year. Red lines traced their attack patterns, blue markers indicated their targets, and yellow highlighted their retreat routes. Notice anything? Rodriguez asked. Kexara studied the data for several minutes before the pattern became clear. They're predictable. Their tactics follow optimal efficiency algorithms. Exactly, Captain Chen said. The Devourers are brilliant at conventional warfare because they calculate the most efficient solution to every problem. But humans don't fight efficiently. We fight dirty. Lieutenant Webb activated his own display, showing what appeared to be a collection of seemingly random military equipment, explosive devices, electronic warfare systems, and items Kexara couldn't even identify. Every human military unit carries what we call improvised solutions, Webb explained. We plan for situations that shouldn't happen, develop contingencies for impossible scenarios, and always assume our enemy will do something we don't expect. The Devourers won't expect it either, Dr. Park added. Their hive mind is incredibly sophisticated, but it's optimized for rational responses to rational tactics. Irrationality is their blind spot. Admiral Kexara found herself intrigued, despite her reservations. What exactly are you proposing? Captain Chen smiled. and Kexara was beginning to recognize that expression as a warning that humans were about to do something unprecedented. We're going to teach the Devourers to feel fear. The Kepler defense line. 3 days later, the combined Human Alliance fleet took up positions at the Kepler defense line, a strategic choke point between Devourer-controlled space and the Haven system. It was here that humanity would put their theories to the test. Kexara stood on the bridge of her flagship, now operating as part of a joint command structure that still made her uncomfortable. Human tactical doctrine seemed to thrive on controlled chaos, with individual commanders given broad discretion to adapt their orders based on battlefield conditions. Devourer fleet approaching, announced Communications Officer Zara. Estimated arrival in 6 hours. Captain Chen, who had transferred her command to the Stellar Guardian to better coordinate with Alliance forces, studied the incoming sensor data with satisfaction. Right on schedule. They're coming exactly where we predicted. How can you be certain? Kexara asked. Because we gave them a target they can't ignore. Lieutenant Webb replied from his position at the Special Operations Console. Admiral, humans learned long ago that the best way to control an enemy is to give them what they think they want. The human plan was unlike anything in Alliance military doctrine. Instead of fortifying their positions and preparing for siege, warfare, they had deliberately weakened specific points in their defensive line while heavily reinforcing others. To Devourer sensors, it would appear that there were critical vulnerabilities to exploit. They'll concentrate their forces on what looks like our weak points, Commander Rodriguez explained, her tactical displays showing the predicted enemy response. But those weak points are actually traps. Dr. Park had spent days analyzing Devourer communication patterns, identifying the specific signals their ships use to coordinate attacks. When they move to exploit our weaknesses, we'll flood their communication channels with false data. Their perfect coordination will become perfect confusion. Kexara still harbored doubts about the plan's viability, but she had to admit that human preparations were unlike anything she had witnessed. They had positioned what they called suicide drones throughout the Kepler system. Small, heavily armed vessels designed to operate without crews and programmed to execute attacks that no rational commander would order. More disturbing were the psychological warfare packages that Lieutenant Webb's teams had prepared. When Kexara had asked for details, Webb had simply said, "Admiral, sometimes the best weapon against a hive mind is to show it something it can't understand." The Devourer fleet arrived exactly as predicted, a vast swarm of biomechanical vessels that darkened the space between the stars. Their formation was perfect, their coordination flawless, their numbers overwhelming. 230,000 vessels, Sub-Commander Veltar reported, his voice hollow. They outnumber us 37-1. Outstanding, Captain Chen said with genuine enthusiasm. The bigger they are, the harder they fall. The Chaos Protocol. The battle began conventionally enough. Devourer forces probed the Human Alliance defensive line, testing for weaknesses with small attack groups. When they identified what appeared to be vulnerable sectors, they began concentrating their forces for breakthrough attacks. That's when the humans activated what they called the Chaos Protocol. The first sign that something unusual was happening came when several Devourer communication nodes began receiving signals that shouldn't exist. Battle reports from ships that had been destroyed days earlier, tactical updates that contradicted observed reality, and command directives that ordered contradictory actions. Their coordination is breaking down, Dr. Park reported with scientific satisfaction. The hive mind is trying to process incompatible data streams. Simultaneously, Lieutenant Webb's suicide drones began their attacks. But instead of targeting critical ship systems or command vessels, they focused on creating maximum psychological impact. Drones would ram into enemy formations and detonate in spectacular displays that served no tactical purpose but created visual chaos that confused Devourer targeting systems. Look at their formation changes, Commander Rodriguez pointed, out on the tactical display. They're responding to threats that don't exist, preparing for attacks that aren't coming. The confusion deepened when human ships began executing maneuvers that violated basic principles of space combat. Vessels would deliberately expose themselves to enemy fire while simultaneously launching attacks that seemed suicidal but somehow succeeded. Others would retreat from winning positions only to circle back and attack from unexpected angles. "This is madness," General Thexmore observed, but his tone carried admiration rather than criticism. "Your ships are operating without any coherent strategy." "That's the point," Captain Chen replied. "The Devourers can predict rational tactics because they're based on logical principles, but human tactics are based on adaptation, intuition, and controlled insanity." The breakthrough came when a human destroyer, apparently damaged and fleeing, allowed itself to be captured by a Devourer boarding party. What the enemy didn't realize was that the ship's crew had rigged their vessel with what humans called a surprise package. When Devourer biomechanical units attempted to interface with the destroyer's computer systems, they instead downloaded a human-designed virus that did something unprecedented. It taught them to doubt. The virus didn't destroy, devour systems or steal their data. Instead, it introduced concepts of uncertainty, alternative possibilities, and individual choice into a hive mind that had never experienced such things. For the first time in their existence, individual Devourer units began questioning orders, hesitating in combat, and making decisions based on self-preservation rather than collective efficiency. "It's working," Dr. Park announced with excitement. "We're seeing individual responses throughout their fleet. The hive mind is fragmenting." Kexara watched in amazement as the Devourer formation began to dissolve. Ships that had moved with perfect coordination now operated independently, often working at cross purposes. Some vessels retreated without orders, others continued attacking without support, and a few simply stopped functioning as their crews experienced something resembling individual consciousness for the first time. "All ships," Captain Chen announced, "execute the finishing protocol." What followed was the most comprehensive defeat in recorded military history. The Devourer fleet, stripped of its coordination and consumed by internal confusion, became easy prey for the combined human alliance forces. Ships that had been invincible when operating as a collective became vulnerable when forced to think as individuals. The new paradigm in the aftermath of the battle, as rescue ships collected Devourer survivors and salvage teams cataloged the wreckage, Admiral Kexara found herself fundamentally reconsidering everything she thought she knew about warfare. 17,000 enemy vessels destroyed or captured, Sub-Commander Veltar reported with amazement. "Our own losses, 43 ships. This shouldn't be possible." Captain Chen, who had remained remarkably calm throughout the battle, finally allowed herself to show satisfaction. "Admiral, this is just the beginning. The Devourer main fleet is still out there, but now they know something's changed. They'll be adapting, preparing countermeasures." "And?" Kexara asked. "And we'll be ready for them," Lieutenant Webb said with quiet confidence. "Humans have been fighting adaptive enemies for our entire history. We always stay one step ahead because we never stop evolving." Dr. Park was already analyzing the captured Devourer vessels and their crews. "Admiral, the virus we introduced has created permanent changes in their neural architecture. Some of these units are developing what we might call individual personalities. They're no longer part of the hive mind." Kexara considered the implications. "You're creating refugees from their own species." "We're creating allies," Captain Chen corrected. "Some of the most effective human military units throughout history have been composed of former enemies who learned to think differently." Over the following days, as news of the Kepler victory spread throughout the remaining Alliance territories, something unprecedented began to happen. Other species started adopting human tactical principles, emphasizing individual initiative over collective coordination, improvisation over rigid planning. The humans had done more than win a battle. They had introduced an entirely new paradigm of warfare to the galaxy. And at the center of it all was a simple human principle that no other species had fully grasped. Sometimes the best solution to an impossible problem is to change the rules entirely. "Captain," Kexara said during their final strategy session, "your species fascinates me. You seem to thrive on chaos and uncertainty." Captain Chen smiled. that same expression of confident anticipation that Kexara was learning to associate with human success. Admiral, chaos and uncertainty are just other words for opportunity. The universe is a big, complicated, unpredictable place. We've learned to see that as an advantage rather than a limitation. As the combined fleet prepared for the next phase of their campaign, Kexara reflected on how much had changed since the humans arrived. The war was still far from over, but for the first time since it began, she was certain they would win. The humans had shown the galaxy something it had forgotten, that victory doesn't always go to the strongest or the most numerous. Sometimes it goes to those who refuse to accept that defeat is inevitable. The Core Assault Admiral Kexara stood before the largest gathering of military leaders in galactic history. Representatives from 47 species filled the massive conference chamber aboard the newly constructed command station Unity's Dawn, positioned at the edge of what had once been Devourer space. In the 6 months since the victory at Kepler, the war had transformed from a desperate struggle for survival into a coordinated campaign of liberation. Human tactical innovations had spread throughout the Alliance fleet, creating a new generation of military leaders who thought in terms of adaptive strategy rather than rigid doctrine. Captain Lisa Chen, now bearing the provisional rank of Admiral, in the Joint Command structure stood beside Kexara as they addressed the assembled commanders. The human's presence had become a symbol of hope throughout Alliance space, her reputation for impossible victories inspiring a generation of officers who had learned to see opportunity where others saw obstacles. Ladies, gentlemen, and distinguished beings, Kexara began, her crystal formations blazing with determination. Today we begin the final phase of Operation Reclamation. Our objective is the Devourer core worlds, the systems where their central consciousness coordinates the remaining swarm forces. The holographic display showed a cluster of 7 star systems surrounded by defensive networks that made previous Devourer positions look primitive. Each system contained millions of enemy vessels, orbital battle stations that could destroy fleets, and planetary installations capable of spawning new Devourer forces at an alarming rate. Intelligence estimates place enemy strength at over 2 million vessels, Sub-Commander Veltar reported, his antennae twitching with nervous energy despite months of victories. Their defensive capabilities are beyond anything we've previously encountered. General Thexmore of the Kithera Swarm, now one of the Alliance's most effective human-trained commanders, gestured toward the tactical display. The conventional approach would require a fleet of 10 million ships and acceptable losses of 70%. Even with our new tactics, such an assault borders on impossible. Which is exactly why it's going to work, Admiral Chen said with characteristic confidence. The Devourers have spent the past 6 months adapting to our chaos protocols and unpredictable tactics. They're expecting us to be unpredictable. Lieutenant Marcus Webb, now commanding the Alliance's Special Operations Division, activated his own display showing detailed intelligence about the core worlds. So this time we're going to be completely, utterly, boringly predictable, right up until we're not. Dr. James Park had spent months studying captured Devourer technology and the psychological changes introduced by human tactics. The core consciousness has evolved significantly since our first encounters. It's developed what we might call paranoia, constantly anticipating chaotic human tactics and preparing countermeasures for impossible scenarios. We're going to use that against them, Admiral Chen explained. Operation Paradox is designed to exploit the Devourer's own adaptations. We'll give them exactly what they expect, until they become so confident in their predictions that they won't see the real attack coming. Kexara studied the human officers, still amazed by their ability to find opportunity in seemingly hopeless situations. Explain the strategy. Admiral Chen smiled, and by now the entire Alliance knew that expression meant the humans were about to rewrite the rules of warfare once again. The Paradox Gambit. The plan that unfolded over the next several hours challenged every principle of military strategy that Kexara had learned during her centuries of service. Operation Paradox was simultaneously the most complex and most elegant tactical concept she had ever encountered. Phase 1 is pure theater, Commander Rodriguez explained, her tactical displays showing the initial assault formation. We approach the core worlds with a massive fleet using exactly the chaotic tactics they've learned to expect. Individual, ships operating independently, improvised weapons, psychological warfare packages, everything we've used in previous battles. The Devourers will counter these tactics effectively, Webb continued. They've had months to develop responses to our chaos protocols. They'll achieve local victories, destroy significant portions of our fleet, and believe they've finally solved the human problem. Dr. Park's xenopsychological analysis showed predicted Devourer responses in real time. Their confidence will peak when they realize their countermeasures are working. The core consciousness will become convinced that human unpredictability has limits, that our tactics can be systematically defeated. That's when we activate Phase 2, Admiral Chen said, her eyes bright with anticipation. While they're focused on countering our chaotic tactics, our real assault force will already be in position. The genius of the plan became clear as Admiral Chen revealed the true scope of Operation Paradox. The massive fleet approaching the core worlds was indeed a decoy, but not in the traditional sense. Every ship, every weapon, every tactical maneuver was real and would be used exactly as predicted. But hidden within that conventional assault was something the Devourers couldn't detect: human innovation at its finest. We've spent 6 months developing new technologies based on captured Devourer systems, Admiral Chen explained, activating displays that showed devices unlike anything in the Alliance arsenal, quantum tunneling charges that can bypass any shield, neural feedback weapons that turn the hive mind's coordination against itself, and something we call reality anchors that prevent local space from being altered by Devourer defensive systems. Lieutenant, Webb's special operations teams had been infiltrating the core worlds for months, not to sabotage installations, but to plant what he called seeds of doubt, devices that would remain dormant until activated, then introduce massive disruption into Devourer command networks. The beautiful part, Dr. Park added with scientific satisfaction, is that we're using their own adaptations against them. The Devourers have become so sophisticated at countering human tactics that they've lost the ability to recognize genuinely new threats. Kexara found herself genuinely awed by the scope and audacity of the human plan. You're essentially conducting 2 completely different wars simultaneously. 3, actually, Admiral Chen corrected. While the Devourers are distracted by our conventional assault and our hidden technological surprises, we'll be executing Phase 3, converting their own forces against them. The revelation sent a shock through the assembled commanders. Converting Devourer forces had been attempted countless times throughout the war, always with catastrophic failure. The virus we introduced at Kepler has been spreading through captured Devourer units, Dr. Park explained. We've been refining it, teaching it to hide within their communication networks. When we activate it during the assault, millions of Devourer units will suddenly rediscover individual consciousness. They won't immediately become our allies, Webb clarified, but they'll stop being perfect collective soldiers. And a Devourer force fighting itself is almost as effective as a human force fighting Devourers. The final battle, the assault on the core worlds, began exactly as predicted. The Alliance fleet, now numbering over 800,000 vessels, approached the Devourer defensive perimeter with the same chaotic tactics that had proven so effective in previous engagements. Kexara watched from the bridge of the Stellar Guardian as human ships scattered in seemingly random directions, Alliance vessels executed impossible maneuvers, and the entire fleet appeared to operate in the controlled madness that had become their signature. The Devourer response was swift and devastating. Their defenses, refined through months of studying human tactics, systematically countered every chaotic maneuver, neutralized every improvised weapon, and predicted every unpredictable strategy. They're cutting through our forces like they did in the early days of the war, Subcommander Veltar reported with growing concern. Admiral, we're losing ships at an unsustainable rate. Admiral Chen, monitoring the battle from her position beside Kexara, showed no concern. Right on schedule. Dr. Park, what's the Devourer confidence level? Approaching critical mass, the xenopsychologist replied, studying feeds from captured Devourer communication networks. The core consciousness believes it has finally achieved tactical superiority over human unpredictability. Excellent, Admiral Chen said, activating her command console. All units execute Paradox Protocol. Webb, light them up. What happened next would be studied in military academies for generations. Across the 7 core worlds, Lieutenant Webb's dormant devices activated simultaneously, creating a cascade of disruption that no Devourer system had been designed to handle. The quantum tunneling charges bypassed every shield and defensive system, striking directly at critical infrastructure. Neural feedback weapons turned the Devourer's perfect coordination into a liability, causing their own command signals to create paralysis rather than unity. Reality anchors prevented their advanced technology from manipulating local space, making their most sophisticated weapons useless. But the true stroke of genius was the viral consciousness awakening. Millions of Devourer units throughout the core world suddenly experienced individual thought for the first time in their existence. The hive mind that had coordinated their species for eons shattered into countless individual perspectives, each one struggling to understand concepts like choice, fear, and self-preservation. Look at this, Communications Officer Zara announced with amazement. We're receiving surrender. Signals from 17 Devourer battle groups. They're asking for asylum. Admiral Chen allowed herself a moment of satisfaction before issuing new orders. All ships, switch to liberation protocols. Our objective has changed from destruction to rescue. Those Devourer units are refugees now, not enemies. The battle continued for 18 hours, but it was no longer a conventional military engagement. Human-trained Alliance forces worked alongside newly conscious Devourer units to disable remaining automated defenses and secure the core worlds for occupation. When the last Devourer command installation fell, it marked the end of not just a battle, but an entire era of galactic history. The new galaxy 3 months after the liberation of the core worlds, Admiral Kexara stood in what had once been the primary Devourer command center, now transformed into the headquarters of the Galactic Reconstruction Authority. The chamber hummed with activity as representatives from dozens of species worked alongside former Devourer units to coordinate the massive effort of rebuilding civilization. Admiral Chen approached, carrying a datapad containing the latest reconstruction reports. In the months since the war's end, she had become something unprecedented in galactic politics. A human leader whose decisions affected the lives of trillions of beings across hundreds of star systems. How are our new citizens adapting? Kexara asked, gesturing toward a group of former Devourer units who were learning to function as individuals rather than components of a hive mind. Better than expected, Admiral Chen replied. Dr. Park's integration programs are helping them develop individual identities while maintaining their technological expertise. We're learning as much from them as they are from us. The transformation had indeed been remarkable. Former Devourer biomechanical units, freed from their collective consciousness, had proven to be extraordinarily capable individuals. Their unique perspective on technology and engineering was revolutionizing reconstruction efforts throughout the galaxy. Admiral, Sub-Commander Veltar announced, approaching with his characteristic nervous energy now tempered by months of success. We've received the final casualty reports from the Core Worlds campaign. Kexara braced herself. Even victory came with a price, and the assault on the Devourer strongholds had been the largest military operation in galactic history. Alliance losses, 2,417 vessels, Veltar reported. Personnel casualties, 93,000. Considering the scope of the operation, the numbers are impossible, General Thexmore finished, his insectoid features showing amazement. We engaged over 2 million enemy vessels across 7 star systems. By conventional calculations, our losses should have been in the millions. Admiral Chen smiled, the expression now familiar to every Alliance officer as a sign that humans had once again achieved the impossible. General, the first thing you learn about human military doctrine is that conventional calculations don't apply when you refuse to accept conventional limitations. Dr. Park joined the group, carrying his latest analysis of post-war galactic dynamics. Admiral, we're seeing unprecedented cooperation between species throughout the reconstructed territories. The shared experience of overcoming the devourer threat has created bonds that transcend traditional species boundaries. It was true. The war had transformed more than just military tactics. It had fundamentally altered how different species viewed cooperation and conflict. The human approach to warfare, emphasizing adaptability, individual initiative, and creative problem-solving, had been adopted by civilizations throughout the galaxy. There's something else, Dr. Park continued, his tone carrying scientific excitement. We're detecting signals from beyond the galactic rim. Other galaxies that have been monitoring our conflict with the Devourers. They're requesting diplomatic contact. Kexara felt a familiar sensation, the mixture of apprehension and anticipation that had become common since humanity's arrival in galactic affairs. What kind of signals? Congratulations, mostly, Admiral Chen replied with characteristic understatement. Apparently, the Devourers have been a problem for several local galaxy clusters. Word is spreading that someone finally figured out how to stop them. Lieutenant Webb, now Director of Galactic Security, added his assessment. We're also detecting what appear to be other threats moving toward our region of space, species and phenomena that make the Devourers look like a minor inconvenience. The revelation should have been terrifying, but Kexara found herself feeling only a calm confidence. The galaxy had learned something invaluable during the Devourer conflict, that no threat was truly insurmountable when different species worked together with human innovation and determination. Well, Admiral Chen said, studying the reports with the same anticipation she had shown before every previous impossible challenge. It looks like we're going to stay busy. The human legacy 1 year after the end of the Devourer War, Admiral Kexara found herself aboard the newly commissioned starship Humanity's Gift, the first vessel designed using combined technologies from every species in the reconstructed galaxy. The ship represented more than just technological advancement. It embodied the new philosophy of cooperation and adaptation that humans had introduced to galactic civilization. The ceremony taking place in the ship's main assembly hall was historic. The formal establishment of the Terran Alliance Defense Compact, a military alliance that made humans the official protectors of galactic civilization. But more than that, it represented the institutionalization of human military philosophy throughout known space. Admiral Chen, Kexara said during a quiet moment between speeches, I've been wondering about something. Your species arrived at exactly the right moment with exactly the right capabilities to defeat the Devourers. That seems like an extraordinary coincidence. Admiral Chen's smile carried depths that Kexara was still learning to read. Admiral, humans don't really believe in coincidences. We believe in preparation meeting opportunity. You knew about the Devourers before you contacted us. We knew about threats like the Devourers, Chen corrected. Humanity has been preparing for existential conflicts our entire history. When we achieved interstellar capability, we designed our expansion and military development around the assumption that somewhere out there, something would try to end us. Dr. Park, overhearing the conversation, added his perspective. Every human military doctrine is based on a simple principle. Someone, somewhere, is developing ways to defeat us. Our job is to stay ahead of them. Kexara considered this philosophy, so different from the Alliance's traditional approach of reactive defense. So you prepare for threats that don't exist yet. We prepare for threats that don't exist yet, Lieutenant Webb confirmed. And we develop solutions for problems we hope we'll never encounter. The Devourers weren't our first existential threat, and they won't be our last. The ceremony concluded with Admiral Chen accepting formal command of the new Galactic Defense Force, a position that made her the first human to hold supreme military authority over multiple galactic civilizations. It was a responsibility that would have overwhelmed any other species, but humans had proven their capability to handle impossible situations. As the assembled representatives dispersed to return to their homeworlds, Kexara remained with Admiral Chen on the observation deck watching the stars that now represented not threats to be feared, but opportunities to be explored. What's next for humanity? Kexara asked. Admiral Chen gazed out at the galaxy that her species had helped save. her expression carrying the same confident anticipation that had characterized every human endeavor since their arrival. "Admiral, we've just gotten started. This galaxy is finally safe, stable, and unified. Now we can begin the real work, which is exploring beyond the galactic rim, making contact with other civilizations, finding new challenges to overcome and new friends to protect." Admiral Chen smiled, and Kexara realized that the expression no longer seemed predatory or unsettling. It had become a symbol of hope itself. "The universe is a big place, Admiral, full of wonders we haven't discovered yet, threats we haven't faced yet, and opportunities we haven't imagined yet. And now we have an entire galaxy of species working together to meet whatever comes next." As the humanity's gift set course for the galactic rim on its first exploration mission, Kexara reflected on how completely everything had changed since that desperate day when the humans first arrived at Haven Prime. They had come when hope was lost and victory was impossible. Now, as the combined fleets of dozens of species prepared to explore unknown regions of space, hope had become humanity's greatest gift to the galaxy. They had taught every species a simple truth: no challenge is insurmountable when beings refuse to accept defeat and work together to find impossible solutions. The war was over. The real adventure was just beginning. The end.